Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really interesting way to get into commercial real estate. Fractional ownership.
hmm
Sometimes those prime properties, the bustling retail spots or the really sleek office building, they just feel completely out of reach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. For most individual investors, they are.
Well, this fractional idea might just change that perspective. We're going to explore how pooling resources lets you own, a share of these high-value assets.
And what that could actually mean for your investment strategy,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And we want to figure out if it's right for our listeners.
Right. And to get a really solid handle on this, we've pulled together insights from quite a few sources. We're looking at articles by Vikas Joshi on LinkedIn, Ganesan Thiru from ICT Connect, good old Investopedia.
Can't do without them.
Never. Also, Soul Realty, Picasso, Realty NXT, Finance Derivative, and Rentila, too.
Okay, quite a list.
Yeah, so think of this as like a guided tour through this whole fractional commercial real estate world. We want to highlight the exciting bits, but also the really important things you need to consider.
So the mission, if you like, is to equip listeners with the knowledge to decide if this approach actually makes sense for them personally.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Fractional ownership.
Mm.
At its heart, it's really about collective buying power, isn't it?
It is simple as that, really. Imagine a group of investors coming together, pooling their money to buy a property.
So instead of one person or company footing the massive bill.
Right, the cost gets divided up. You could picture owning, say, a small slice of a big, prominent office building downtown. Your investment gives you a proportional stake in that asset.
Which straight away just lowers that financial hurdle, doesn't it?
Dramatically.
Yeah.
Suddenly, these kinds of premium commercial properties aren't just for the huge institutions or the super wealthy anymore.
It really opens the door.
It really does. And what's particularly interesting, I think, is how it broadens the audience for commercial real estate investment.
Yeah.
Like both Vikas Joshi and Ganesan Thiru point this out, that high capital requirement has always been, well, a major barrier.
Sure.
Fractional ownership tackles that directly. It lets you access potentially high-performing properties, the kind you probably couldn't touch on your own, with a much smaller chunk of an initial cash.
And it's not just about needing less cash to get started, though that's huge. Our sources seem to highlight some other really compelling advantages.
Definitely.
I mean, lower entry costs is obviously the big one, like Joshi and Thiru emphasized. But nearly every source we looked at, Joshi, Thiru, Investopedia, Soul Realty, Picasso, Realty NXT, Finance Derivative, they all keep circling back to this idea of access to premium properties.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme. These are the kinds of, high caliber assets that just wouldn't normally be on the radar for an individual investor acting alone.
Right.
And if you think about that in terms of like the bigger picture of your investment strategy. Diversification.
Exactly. Ganesan Thiru and Finance Derivative both really highlight that benefit. Diversification. Instead of tying up a massive amount of capital in one single property, which is inherently risky, very risky. Fractional ownership lets you spread your investment across multiple assets, maybe different types of properties or different locations.
So like you might have a piece of an office building, maybe some industrial space, a bit of retail.
Precisely. So think about it. If, say, the retail sector hits a rough patch because, shopping habits change.
Which they do.
Constantly. Well, your entire investment isn't sunk because you also have stakes in office or industrial properties that might be doing just fine. That spread helps cushion the blow. It mitigates the risk.
Right. You're not putting all your eggs in one commercial property basket. Makes sense. Plus, Vikas Joshi and Rentila also mention the potential for steady rental income.
And capital appreciation, the property going up in value over time. Which, that's fundamentally what people look for in real estate investing, isn't it? Those regular returns from rent, and then your asset hopefully growing in value.
That's the goal. And let's not forget the practical side of things. Many of these fractional ownership platforms, they offer professional management services.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, Thiru, Rentila, and Finance Derivative all touch upon this. And it's a really significant plus because it basically lifts the burden of day-to-day property management off your shoulders as an investor.
So things like finding tenants, dealing with leaky faucets, chasing rent.
All that stuff. Handling maintenance requests, administrative tasks, it's taken care of by the management team.
Wow, okay. That sounds like a massive time saver. And probably avoids a lot of headaches, too.
Definitely. And Soul Realty brings up another related point. The reduced financial and maintenance burdens overall.
Because it's shared.
Exactly. Because all those costs and responsibilities, upkeep, repairs, insurance, taxes, they're shared among all the fractional owners.
Yeah.
Your individual slice of that pie is much smaller and more manageable.
Less financial exposure, less hassle.
hmm And Ganas and Thiru adds another interesting possibility, potentially greater liquidity.
Really. Because I always think of real estate, especially commercial, as being pretty illiquid. Hard to sell quickly.
Well, traditionally, yes. Selling an entire commercial building can take ages, months, even years sometimes. But with fractional ownership, depending on the platform and how they structure things,
Okay.
there could be more flexibility if you need to sell your share. It depends heavily on whether the platform has like an internal marketplace or some mechanism for selling shares.
A secondary market for these fractions.
Sort of, yeah. Some platforms might have more active ones than others, so it's potentially easier to find a buyer for your fraction compared to selling a whole building, but it's not guaranteed instant liquidity by any means.
Got it. So potentially more liquid, but not necessarily highly liquid.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, look, this all sounds pretty compelling. Lower costs, access, diversification, professional management, shared burdens. But, like any investment, there have to be some potential downsides, right? Some catches.
Well, absolutely. It's crucial to look at the other side of the coin. And one of the main things highlighted by Investopedia and Realty NXT is the issue of limited control.
Ah, okay. That makes sense if you only own a piece.
Exactly. You don't have the same kind of solo decision-making power you'd have if you own the whole property yourself.
So decisions about, say, major renovations, or choosing a property manager, or even when to sell the property.
Right. Those big decisions might need agreement among all, or at least a majority of the co-owners. You're part of a group.
That seems like a really important thing to understand going in. You're not the sole boss. How can investors, navigate that? Does it cause problems?
It can, potentially. But interestingly, Rentila and Finance Derivative suggest that having that professional management we talked about can actually help mitigate some of those concerns.
Awesome.
Well, a good experienced management team can act as sort of an impartial third party. Their job is to ensure the property is run effectively and maintained well, theoretically for the benefit of all the owners, not just one faction.
Okay, so the management acts as a buffer, almost. Provides some professional oversight.
To some extent, yes. It introduces that professional layer. Now, you mentioned liquidity earlier. Investopedia also flags potential challenges with liquidity.
Right, which seems a bit contradictory to what Ganis and Theory suggested about greater liquidity. What's the deal there?
Yeah, it's a nuanced point. While the fractional model can, in theory, offer better liquidity compared to owning a whole building.
The point you made earlier.
Right. But it's not a universal guarantee across every single platform or every single property. The actual ease of selling your fraction really depends on specifics.
Ugh.
Like, how does the platform's trading system work, if they even have one? How much demand is there for shares in that specific building at the time you want to sell? What are the general market conditions like?
So it could be easy or it could be tricky.
Exactly. It varies. So
Yeah.
it's really vital for anyone considering this to dig into the specific liquidity rules and the track record of the platform they're looking at before they invest. Don't just assume you can cash out quickly.
Good advice. Due diligence on the exit strategy. Okay, what else?
Well, there's the human element, the potential for disagreements or disputes among the co-owners themselves.
Ah, yes. Multiple partners, multiple opinions.
Precisely. Soul Realty, Picasso, and Realty NXT all identify this as a possible risk. When you've got several stakeholders involved, maybe with different financial goals or different timelines.
Yeah, conflicts can definitely top up. I can imagine arguments about, say, spending money on upgrades versus just collecting rent.
That's a classic example.
Well-
Some owners might want to reinvest profits into renovations to boost long-term value, while others might prefer maximizing short-term cash flow.
So how do you manage that?
This is where having really clear communication channels helps, but
Yeah.
even more critical are well-drafted, comprehensive co-ownership agreements.
The legal paperwork.
Absolutely essential. Soul Realty, Realty NXT, and Rentila all hammer this point home. These agreements need to spell everything out clearly.
Like what specifically?
Things like the rights and responsibilities of each owner, the exact process for making decisions, how votes are handled, what requires unanimous consent versus a majority, and crucially, clear procedures for resolving disputes if they do arise.
Like a prenup for property co-owners.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it as setting the ground rules for the partnership right from the beginning. A good agreement anticipates potential friction points, like those capital expenditure decisions, and lays out how they'll be handled.
Okay, that seems critical. Get the agreement right up front. So for our listeners who are thinking, hmm, this fractional thing sounds interesting, what are some concrete actionable steps they should take?
Well, number one, without a doubt, is choosing the right platform. Do your homework.
Don't just jump on the first one you see advertised.
Definitely not. Look for platforms with a solid track record, strong legal and operational frameworks, and really transparent procedures. You need to conduct thorough due diligence to make sure the platform fits your own investment goals and, importantly, your tolerance for risk.
Right. Different platforms might cater to different risk appetites or investment styles.
Exactly. And as we just discussed, it sounds like we really can't stress enough the importance of getting your head around those co-ownership agreements.
Read the fine print.
Read all the print. Before you commit any money, take the time to carefully review and genuinely understand every clause in that agreement.
What should they be looking out for specifically?
Pay really close attention to the details on how decisions get made, the mechanisms for resolving disagreements, the exact process for exiting your investment, the liquidity point again, and also what the responsibilities of the property management team are and how they're held accountable.
Okay, so platform due diligence and agreement deep dive. Got it.
Yeah.
Can we maybe make this a bit clearer with a sort of real-world example? How does it actually play out?
Sure. So imagine maybe 5 or 10 individual investors. They each put in, say, $50,000 through a specific fractional ownership platform.
Clever.
They pool their funds together, maybe $500,000 total, to collectively buy a significant share, let's say 25%, of a commercial office building in a thriving downtown business district.
Right, a building they couldn't possibly buy outright individually.
Exactly. So each of those investors now owns a percentage of that 25% share, directly proportional to their $50K investment.
And then?
Well, then they start receiving their proportional cut of the rental income generated by the tenants in that building, maybe paid out quarterly by the platform.
Okay, the income stream.
Right? And on top of that, if the building increases in value over time, their share also increases in value proportionally. They benefit from that capital appreciation.
And meanwhile?
And meanwhile, the professional management team, hired either by the platform or the ownership group, is handling all the day-to-day stuff, finding tenants, signing leases, collecting rent, dealing with maintenance, paying the bills, all that operational work.
So the investors are relatively passive, just collecting income and hoping for appreciation.
Largely, yes. It frees them up from those management headaches.
It is interesting to see this model gaining traction. You mentioned some examples earlier. In India, for instance, there are platforms like Strata and Meyer Capital.
That's right. They're becoming quite popular there, making it possible for regular investors to get a piece of high-value commercial properties, warehouses, office parks, with much lower amounts of capital than traditionally needed.
It really does feel like it's opening up a market segment that was, for a long time, pretty much closed off, except to big institutional players or the very wealthy.
It does seem to be democratizing access to some extent. So when you, the listener, think about your own financial situation, fractional ownership presents, well, a pretty compelling potential way to maybe enhance your financial stability.
Through diversification.
Definitely achieve greater diversification within your overall investment portfolio, and crucially get access to those premium commercial assets without needing that huge financial outlay required for sole ownership.
But, and it's a big but we've explored, you absolutely have to go in with your eyes wide open.
Absolutely. It's vital. You need to carefully weigh those advantages. The lower costs, the diversification, the pro-management against the potential downsides.
Like the limited control we talked about
Yeah.
and the possibility of getting into disagreements with your co-owners.
Exactly. It's a trade-off, like most investments.
So ultimately, it comes down to understanding both sides. The potential upsides and the inherent challenges is really key, isn't it?
That's the core message. You need to honestly assess whether this fractional model lines up with your personal investment strategy, your comfort level with risk, and frankly, your willingness to be part of a shared ownership structure where you don't call all the shots.
Right. So maybe a final thought for our listeners as they mull this over. As you think about your long-term investment goals, where could fractional ownership potentially fit in? Do those benefits, the diversification, getting into potentially better assets, do they outweigh the challenges of shared control and maybe less liquidity than you thought? Is that trade-off worth it for you?
It's a personal calculation.
Maybe the next step, if you're still interested, is to actually start exploring some of these platforms online, see what kinds of properties they offer, and really dig into the details of their co-ownership agreements and fee structures.
That's the crucial takeaway, I think. Fractional ownership offers a genuinely interesting opportunity. It lets you invest in commercial real estate, potentially with a lower risk profile and definitely lower capital needed up front.
Yeah.
But it absolutely requires careful thought about the potential challenges. Understanding both the rewards and the risks is what lets you make truly informed decisions that are right for your circumstances.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Hopefully this has given everyone a much clearer picture of the world of fractional commercial real estate ownership.
Yes, and we really encourage you to keep exploring if it sparks your interest, and seriously consider how it might or might not align with your own long-term financial goals.
Until our next deep dive.